Hello everyone. It's all in the details. This is the discussion this evening. I don't know how you experience the details of your life, but as one of the saying, maybe John Lennon was, that said that life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. Most people complain and talk about how they're overwhelmed by the details of their lives. The minutiae for survival, work, and all the other things that consume us and often don't allow us to focus on what we call priorities. Now, some people will say that thank God for the details, because that way I don't have to focus on the priorities, and that way I have an excuse to remain distracted. And because it can be a little awkward and uncomfortable when you have to suddenly talk about things that really matter. So details are a great scapegoat. But at the end of the day, there's also an expression we say, the devil is in the details, they say. Now we Jews don't believe in the devil, so the root of the expression really is God is in the details. God is in the details. That means, like, for example, if you're having some type of, let's say, a corporate merger or any other type of great idea. So even if you have a meeting of the minds and two people agree or two companies agree to a particular relationship, then of course they say, and now you have to work out and hammer out the details. And that's where all the complications usually set in. So I guess, depending whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, is the way you would use it, whether it's the devil is in the details, or God is in the details, or God is in the details. But the interesting thing is that however you twist it, this question is really a fundamental question in our lives, because it comes down to what are our priorities and what do we focus on a daily basis. As I said, most cases life takes over and your survival controls your agenda. Most people do not feel that they control their lives in the fullest sense of the word, because there are all the different demands and expectations and needs, whether it's to make a living, whether it's shelter, food, clothing, and all that comes with that. And of course there's all the other stuff that what we call luxuries and leisures that have become so much part of our lives as well. And at the end of the day, it becomes extremely difficult to get out of your habits and routines. So in this week's chapter, Torah chapter, which for many it can be surprising to find tremendous relevance to modern life. Because one would think that the Bible, which was written so many years ago and talks about events and a part of the world that is so distant from us. You're talking about biblical times over 3,500 years ago. Completely different world. Not just technology, but also politically and economically and almost every way possible. It was a different type of reality. And yet, this book remains the greatest bestseller. And especially for us Jews, it is the timeless book that we continue to read every Shabbos, week after week, 3 times a week actually. The Talmud says that Moses, just like the Torah is compared to water, and just like a person can't go without water for 3 days, so Moses designated that we should read the Torah at least every 3 days. So we read it the Monday, Thursday, and then on Shabbat we read the entire chapter. And many people reading the Bible remains quite a cryptic book that doesn't necessarily seem to have personal relevance. Obviously, there are general stories in the Bible that became classics. The story of the Garden of Eden, the story of Sinai, principles like love your fellow, the principles of kindness, justice, and freedom that we so cherish today. But the details of the Torah, talk about details, don't seem to be relevant when you read it ostensibly. So what I do is in this class is try to take different sections or different episodes and demonstrate that when you read it properly, especially the soul of the story, using the mystical teachings and the other layers of meanings within the Torah, not only do you find relevance, I would say you find tremendous relevance that precedes all other guidebooks to life. Because the Torah is the ultimate life operator's manual. It's the ultimate guide to living. And when you look deep enough, you find this type of relevance. So here's a topic that is so relevant to us today. Everybody here has got, I'm sure, a smartphone, right? And how much information do you have on this phone? How many details? How important are these details? And yet we become addicted to them, where people feel that if they lose their phone for 5 minutes, or they haven't texted someone or haven't been texted, they're out of touch, let alone for more than a few minutes. That's just an example how technology, with all its advances and the ability to allow us to communicate, to access information anywhere, anytime, any place, and any piece of information, at the same time has also enslaved many of us. I mean, nobody ever wants to know the statistics of how much time we waste now that we don't even have to go anywhere. You can just press a few buttons. Most people don't like to know how much time they spend that has no real benefit to anyone. And I'm not here to bemoan or to talk about the fire and brimstone against technology. It's just sometimes one has to look honestly at themselves and see how much of your life are consumed, as I said, by details, and how much of it is consumed with real priorities. So it's no wonder we live in a world where there's such a thirst and hunger for love. People are craving some love. People are craving some companionship, some intimacy. We're not talking about superficial or artificially induced intimacy. The idea of 60,000 people in a stadium all yelling and screaming and fans of a particular team can create the illusion of unity. But the truth is nobody knows each other and nobody really cares about each other once you leave the stadium. So we live in a world where there can be the illusion of closeness, when the truth is people are really very lonely. And loneliness brings all kinds of other problems. Loneliness is not a feature that brings the best out of us. Loneliness brings anxiety, it brings despair, it brings feeling that you have no support. And though most people, again, don't like to talk about these things because nobody wants to say I'm lonely, it doesn't sound good, it sounds pathetic. But the fact of the matter, and I can't speak on behalf of anybody except myself, but I speak since I meet many people and I study the human condition, there's a lot of loneliness. So, and all you need to do is look at the statistics. How many relationships last? Average marriage doesn't last for more than a few years. And even the marriages that do last, people are lonely in marriage itself. What is Leonard Cohen sings, let's be lonely together. So that people become lonely together. And there are these darker elements in our lives, and how we relieve ourselves of these difficult moments, or this ongoing, Thoreau put it over 100 years ago, he wrote, in Walden he wrote that most men lead lives of quiet desperation, and they die with their song still inside them. This is a statement, and it resonates with many. So we find relief through poetry, and through music, and through art, and through travel, and through sexuality, and through all kinds of other releases. And then, of course, we all have our little dark corners, the things we don't share, the things that probably we'd be ashamed to share, those little, the ugly spaces that we're not very proud of, in the different ways that we find some release and some relief from existential loneliness or existential tension. These issues are addressed in a fascinating way in this week's chapter. And you think, how could 3,500 years ago someone would have documented something like that? It sounds so contemporary. Modern psychology talks about existential pain and anxiety. Concepts like this didn't exist when they didn't have technologies. Well, the human condition is not here today, and Jews have always been students of the human condition, and the Bible documented the human condition. The stories in the Torah are all about issues like this. Again, you have to just know how to read it. So we're going to talk about loneliness, we'll talk about some details, the details of our lives, and hopefully come away with some type of fresh game plan and hope, renewed hope, that we could probably get some more control over our lives. And of course, as like anything, the biggest consequences of a person's internal conflicts are going to be in the areas of intimacy, relationships, love, children, family. Those are the areas, those are the first to fall when your psyche is shattered, or your psyche is wounded. Because those are the areas that are the real matters of life. You can run a successful business and be as dysfunctional as it gets. You can have a lot of money and be miserable. But you can't be miserable and have a good, healthy family. Because that's where the real you and your internal state of wholesomeness, or lack of wholesomeness, dysfunctionality, the first place, the most sensitive place that it will be sensed will be within a family structure. Your siblings, your children, your parents, your spouses, your girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever it may be. And we see that. Children are impressionable. And our parents' attitudes, where does it first express itself? It affects the children more than anything else. Children are the first casualties of any dysfunctional environment because they have no protection. All they have is the love that their parents can give them. They have nowhere to run. They have no alternative. So the first place that these things express themselves in a society is going to be in the internal fabric of what shapes us as human beings. And that's why it's so critical to address, first of all, for our own sake, and also for the sake of whatever generations we will bring into this world, in whatever form or fashion it may take. So you have the story of Jacob in this chapter, where he encounters in this week's chapter, after 20 years, and he built his family in the distant land of Haran, where he had to escape because of his brother's wrath. He built a family that would become the basis of the Jewish people, the tribes. They're all born outside of Israel, in the land called Haran. They discussed last week, Haran means wrath. It actually means wrath. Talk about wrath. And now Jacob returns to Israel in this chapter, and he sends messengers to see what the status of his brother Esav is like. Is he still angry? And they come back and say, Esav is ready to go to war with you. He's marching with 400 men. He's ready to confront you. So Jacob realized things are not good. And we'll soon discuss the personal message in all this. I just want to first tell the basic narrative. So Jacob, what does he do? He prepares like a good smart Jew in 3 ways. He doesn't put all his eggs in one basket. These are themes I discussed in previous classes, previous years, so I'm not going to address it in detail. But briefly, what Jacob does is he prays to God. He says, I've been humbled by all your kindness to me, and please help me in this situation. Number 2, he prepares a bribe to appease Esav. And number 3, he prepares for war, which itself is a lesson in life that you have to always have everything ready. War is always the last resort, but you can't be naive. In case the other options don't work, you have to be ready to do the confrontation. But it's the last option, and thank God he doesn't have to resort to that. The prayer and the appeasement works. And what happens is, as he prepares, he separates his family, because he had now a large family and a lot of livestock and a lot of possessions that he was traveling with. And the Torah describes in detail how he prepared and so on. But then comes a very fascinating and mysterious little subplot in the whole story. Before he actually meets Esav, the Torah says like this, that he got up by night, Vayokem balayla. He took his wives and he took all his children. There were 11 at that point. The 12th would be born later. Benjamin would be born. The youngest son would be born in Israel later. That's why it's called Benjamin. Ben Yamin means the son of. It relates to the Yamin is the east, so it refers to Israel. And he takes them and he crosses he crosses a small little river. And then he sets them there. Does it at night, in the dark of night, as he's preparing to enter into Israel and so on. But then it says the following verse. That's what I want to focus on. In Hebrew, Vayivoser Yaakov levade. Very strange statement. It says Yaakov remained alone, levade, alone. Where did he remain alone? He remained alone on the other side of the river, where after he had crossed, he had gone back and he remained alone. And then the second half of the same verse says, Vayavik ish imay adales hashachar. And a mysterious man, ish is a man, doesn't say a name, doesn't say what type of man, wrestled with him until the dawn, till the break of dawn. It's a verse. Then it continues and talks more details about this wrestling. So everybody knows the story, the wrestling with the angels. Jacob's wrestle with, as some commentaries say, there are different opinions who this Ish is, who this mysterious gentleman is. Some say it was the angel of Esav, so to speak, his guardian angel. So before he's meeting Esav, Esav's angel comes to challenge him. And there are other opinions as well. There are opinions, is this a good angel? Is it a bad angel? Is it a devil, or is it a divine angel, or is it a devilish angel? And I'll address that soon as well. But that's the cryptic sentence. Then it continues and says that they battled all night. And the morning came, and this mysterious man realized he cannot prevail over him. So it says he displaced his hip, or his sciatic nerve. And then he said to him, please let me go. Jacob would not let go of this mysterious man. And he says, please do not, and he says, I'll let you go only if you bless me. That's what Jacob says. And he says, hey, so the man says to him, what is your name? He says, my name is Jacob. He says, from now on, your name will not be Jacob, or not only Jacob, it will be also Israel. And here's the birth of the word Israel. When we say the land of Israel, the people of Israel, the children of Israel, this is where it's born. It's born at the end of a wrestling match with a mysterious man who gives him the name Israel. You know, we all know the name Israel, the most popular name of the Jewish people, the children of Israel, as I said, the land of Israel. But few know that it's rooted in a very mysterious episode here. So the name is shrouded in a mysterious story here. And hopefully in our discussion we'll be able to, as I said, unravel part of this, and more above all, to take out personal lessons in our own lives. So what is the significance of this story? As I said, commentaries, there are layers and layers of commentaries. From Rashi, the Ramban, you name it. Whoever reads this has a commentary. Because it begs for commentary, because there's so many questions here. Who's this Ish? What's the significance of the wrestling? Why couldn't he prevail? Why did he displace his hip? What is this thing about changing names? Then he lets him go. I mean, it's fraught with questions. Obviously, I can't talk about them all, and I have discussed many details in the past. And even the word Vayavik, the wrestling, there's so many interpretations. Vayavik, what does it mean in Hebrew? So Rashi brings several meanings. So some say Vayavik means that the dust rose. You know, when two people wrestle in the ground, dust rises. So the word Avik in Hebrew is dust. So it was referring to dust. Now, how does that fit into this story here? So again, the questions are plentiful. But I want to focus on a few key things, the few key points to the entire story. And the biggest question of all is, why did Jacob stay alone there? Why didn't he just stay with his family? What's he doing alone? And the Torah emphasizes that. And it seems from the verse that his being alone was what caused him to be vulnerable, that someone would come attack him. Had he been with his family, it appears from the verse. Again, appears, you could always interpret differently, but that's the verse goes. It says, this is the verse. It says, the family moved over to the other side of the river. Then it says, and now Jacob remained alone. And the same verse, and this mysterious man wrestled with him until the morning. And then it continues the rest of it. So there's seemingly two separate episodes here. One thing, he remained alone, and second thing, he wrestled. The fact that it's in one verse clearly means there's a relationship between the two. So as I said, I'm not going to go through all the layers of meanings because there are so many. I want to focus on, above all, the real soul of the story. What is the real significance of the whole thing? So we have to go back to the root of it all. Who is Jacob and who is Esau? Why are they battling in the first place? What's the significance of their battle? Like in all stories, if you want to really appreciate the details, you have to go back to the core theme. So it's just a lesson in education in general, and study in general, and I would say even in analysis. In analysis, you'll find people who are very good at analyzing symptoms, but not everyone is so good at finding the roots of a problem. Like, let's say whether it's in a corporate culture or in a personal situation, there's some people, that's why you go, there are people who are really trained, you show them a situation, they will always point out a problem you may have not even noticed. Because they're able to look at the root. Now, why is it so difficult to get to the root of a problem? Because what we see before our eyes, what is here and now, does not demonstrate what the root is like. If a person is in trouble in life, whatever that trouble may be, and they're going to therapy for help, they say, I'm lost. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck. I don't know how to get out of my situation. So the problem did not begin at that moment when they feel lost. Think of it like this. If you get lost in the woods, does anybody suddenly get lost in a split second? It never works that way. You're on your road, you're going in the right direction, then you veer off for whatever reason, just a moment, a drop. Now if you nip it in the bud, and you catch it quickly, you go right back on. But what happens if you don't catch that little veering off, that little swerve? What happens is you start continuing to travel, and you keep going more and more, and then at some point, you're so lost you don't know your way back. Psychologically, emotionally, in every way, the psyche was exactly the same thing. There's no such thing as you make a big mistake. Every big mistake starts with a small mistake. It's like a small lie. Say a little lie. Okay, you got away with it. Then suddenly it may come back to haunt you. You suddenly have to say another lie to protect the first lie. And then comes a third lie, and a fourth lie, and a fifth lie. And then you can't get out of it because it's so complicated. This is true with relationships. Almost every situation, had it been caught immediately, quickly, like an infection. You catch it quickly, you can prevent the worst calamities. Problem is that most of us either don't like to address a problem, so we just push it away, or we don't even realize that it's a problem. So, like they say, the cover-up is worse than the crime. Or sometimes, as the expression is used in more frank terms, the silence was worse than the rape. In healing, they say, and make an expression like that. Because when someone is abused or violated in some way, so it's one thing to be violated, but then a healthy human being reacts to it and says, this was wrong, I want to correct it. I want a retribution. I want an apology, etc. But if that person is silenced and said nothing happened, you're imagining it. That in many ways is worse than the original crime, because now the cover-up invalidates your ability even to cry out, and that is even far less forgivable. People make mistakes, and so someone makes a mistake, you can correct the mistake. But then to say there was no mistake and it's your own imagination, then you're basically also undermining a person's sense of justice. When a child in some way is hurt, and then it's told nothing happened, the child begins to second guess itself. Something's wrong with me. What do you think happens with a child who's been hurt again and again and again? They keep saying that nothing happened. That child never has confidence in its own tools. Because next time something happens, the child second guesses, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm wrong. You see this consistently. People who are unable to have a compass of what is more morally correct or wrong is often traced to an undermining and invalidation of their initial instinct. So when you're, as a child, told 1,000 times, no, you say it's dark outside, and someone tells you, no, it's really light outside, at some point the child will adjust and create a false fabricated reality. So getting to the root of something is always the key to every problem. Now, it's not easy to do that. That's why we need sometimes an objective eye, because a subjective person, you're part of the problem. So it's hard for you to define and trace the roots. You're maybe part of the problem. Where an objective person can step back and look at the whole story and try to trace it to some point and say, this is rooted here and here, and let's get to that. I've counseled many couples. I can tell you hands down that when there's some domestic crisis, hands down that when a couple come and talk to you about their problems and you ask them what is the problem, rarely, 99% of the time, I'm ready to say this, what the problem they say is not the real problem. It's the symptoms of the problem. Not because they're concealing it. They may not even know themselves. Because when something starts irritating you, then everything becomes a problem. And when you look to the root of things, the root is not usually the thing that's irritating. Like when someone starts saying, okay, he does this and this is that. I can't stand how he eats. I can't stand how he walks. I can't stand how he dresses. You say, well, one second, he always walked and dressed like that. Why'd you marry him in the first place? I don't know, I didn't notice it or something like that. That means there's something else going on that's really bothering the person, and now everything bothers you. Once that person has been once that person you have something that offends you, then everything becomes a problem. And it's hard and difficult because you've pointed symptoms when in truth there's something far deeper going on. And sometimes you discover it easily, sometimes not. Sometimes you see it very clearly, but the people don't want to acknowledge it because it's far easier to point at the problem on the surface level than to look at what's at the root of it. So why am I saying all of this? Because Jacob and Esau is a root issue. And how do we know this? Because when you go back to the beginning of the story, instead of discussing all the details about all the questions I asked, let's go to the beginning story. Why in Jacob and Esau fighting in the first place? If we understand that, I submit we'll be able to understand the rest of the story. So you go back to the last chapter and you find that Rebecca, this is the early roots of Jacob and Esau. Rebecca is pregnant with twins. And the beginning of the last chapter, she has a very difficult pregnancy. She comes and asks God, why is it so difficult? And God responds, because you have within you two nations. That's what it says. You have two nations inside of you who are fighting with one another. In other words, basically these two boys, these twins, were archetypes for two nations. And when one rises, the other will fall. They're basically alter egos. It's the birth of the alter ego. It's clear. This is not, what I just said, by the way, is not commentary. This is strict verse. So it's not reading into it. It's exactly what it says in the verse. The two of the alter egos, and then when they're born, it becomes obvious. Jacob, first comes Esav. He's red with a lot of hair, and he would turn into become a warrior, a man of the field, it says. A man that was a very shrewd and sly and warrior. And Jacob came out second, and Jacob was very mild-mannered, and he was Ish Tom Yeshiv Aholim. He was a simple person, simple in the sense of a scholarly type. Yeshiv Aholim means literally he sat in the tent. He was a scholar. So two alter egos, but they're twins, and they're brothers. They carry the same genes, and they carry the same blood. And the battle begins. And the previous chapter discusses their battle with the right of the firstborn, and then the battle over the blessings. What is the essence of the battle? So the Zohar says, and the mystical teachings, the battle is essentially the battle within each of us. We too have two voices within. One is called the voice of the warrior, and then we have the gentle, the angel and the warrior, if you want to put it that way. The gentle one, the gentlest voice and the warrior. I don't know if you know, and they both are necessary in life. Remember, they're both children of Isaac and Rebekah, so they're both very special people. But there are two voices. What is the warrior within us? Let's define it. We live in a world that is not an easy world to live in. It's a hostile world. And we need to have an arsenal. We need to have our arms. We need to protect ourselves from predators. We need to tame the wilderness, tame the elements, and be able to build a home in a hostile world. You look at any city, any community, these are human beings who use their warrior-like tendencies to tame the environment and build, within a wilderness, build themselves a home. Who knows what was wandering here in New York City 500-600 years ago, 1,000 years ago? It was a wilderness. Human beings came and they tamed it. The warrior in us is apparent in any given day in our lives. It's perhaps how we negotiate in business. It's how we litigate. Some of us are very aggressive. But you need to have some measure of aggression in this world. The problem becomes when you become the warrior, instead of it just being a tool when necessary. Like I said before, war should be the last option. So we'll discuss that in a moment. But that's one part of us. If we don't have the ability to fight for something, we can be hurt. So God gave us a warrior within us. Then there's another voice within us, the voice of reason. The voice that did not choose battling, the voice that chooses to build a hearth. You may tame the element and build yourself a home, but inside your home you don't want to have a war. Inside your home you want to have warmth, love. You want to build a family and bring up a family that is constantly at harmony and tranquility. So this is the tranquil, harmonious voice. Another way you can put it is that Esav, the warrior, is inside of is the survival part of us, the voice of survival, and the Jacob part of it within us is the voice of transcendence. And we all need both. What would a human being like if we had no transcendence? If we were just struggling for survival? So we all need some type of release and relief, as I mentioned before, from the tediousness, from the struggle of life. You can say in Jewish tradition, you can say that 6 days of the week is more survival, and Shabbat, the Menucha, is more the Jacob. So we have times when we're dealing with the mundane world and struggling with it, and there are times where we want to have inner peace. This could be the holidays, it could be a Shabbat, it could be any given day when you pray, when you study, is a form of an oasis. Just want to describe how it's a universal two voices within us, two parts of our life experience. Now in a balanced life where everything is healthy, they both speak to each other and they're both at peace with one another. But life is not that simple. The fact is they are struggling and they fight with each other because they both want dominance. And it becomes increasingly difficult to live side by side. So a newborn child, a young child, doesn't yet have the development of the warrior. Children are Jacob by nature. It's when we start developing our tools and we start becoming adults and we start fighting for our turf, where there becomes competition, envy, the other elements that cause the tensions between man, between people. That's when the warrior starts emerging. Now, in the best of worlds, as I said, both are necessary. I don't know if any of you are called Trekkies, Star Trek. So there was this Star Trek show where they had that Captain Kirk split into two personalities, the warrior in him and the wise one. And they both could not survive without the other. Because the warrior was the one that had a drive, passion, but had no direction. And the wise one had direction, but was very timid and very quiet. And in life, you really need a combination of both. You need a combination of drive, passion, that often comes from the warrior part, ambition, but you also need direction and guidance. Unfortunately, in most cases, they become unbalanced. You have one or the other. And often in this world, especially in the modern world, aggression is usually the dominant force. Why do you think, even you talk about the feminist movement, males are more aggressive than women. And they have used their aggression to dominate. So we live in a warlike zone. In more of evolutionary biological terms, Richard Dawkins has his classic book called The Selfish Gene. The name itself is a call to war. The selfish gene. So if you have your selfish gene, I have my selfish gene, what happens when two selfish genes meet? They both compete for the resources. So some will argue that life, all of life is the war called the survival of the fittest. Everyone knows that line. That became almost as famous as Bereshis bara Elokim, right? As the beginning God created heaven and earth. So you have the battle and so on. So now there's a battle going on between these two voices within us. And that's what the Torah is addressing. That's why the story of Jacob and Esav is so vital and so relevant to our personal lives. Okay, so at some point Jacob has to escape and runs away and builds his own family. Then he returns. And here comes the second half of the story. Not the battle, what happens now? Can these two voices reconcile with one another? Just to give you the happy ending is that they do reconcile. At the end of the story, Jacob and Esav meet, they don't go to war. They hug and embrace. Because as I said before, the appeasement and the prayer helped. The prayer and appeasement helped. They embrace. There's two opinions whether they embraced wholeheartedly or not wholeheartedly. But they embraced. And Esav even offers Jacob, let's live side by side. But let's not jump to the conclusion. Just in case any of you are getting conniptions, I just wanted to tell you that we're not going into war here. It's only possible war. So Jacob and Esav do embrace, and it says that at the end of days when Mashiach comes, they will totally embrace. And there will be a union between these two, because the goal in Jewish philosophy, in Jewish mysticism, the objective is not destruction of the warrior, but a fusion and an integration between matter and spirit. So initially, matter and spirit there's a tension between matter and spirit. Now, in different theological systems and mystical systems, you'll find those that advocate, especially in the Far Eastern schools of thought, they advocate more, enter the world of spirit. Matter is either an illusion, live a monastic, an aesthetic life, ascetic lifestyle. Not aesthetic, ascetic with a C. Others believe, for example, if you take the Protestant, the Calvinistic school of what we call the Protestant work ethic, of that ultimately led to capitalism, that's live in this world, work hard, immerse in the material world, do not live an ascetic lifestyle, but find kindness, find justice in this material world. Judaism's approach is very unique. Judaism's approach is that that we want to have the best of both worlds, the ultimate of spirit and the ultimate of matter, and a total fusion of the two. Here's not the place how to discuss this philosophically, how this is possible, but briefly I will say, because Jewish mysticism teaches that God is neither spirit nor matter, as opposed to other schools of thought that define God as spiritual, neither spirit or matter. Therefore, these two can be joined together. And the ultimate goal is the union of Jacob and Esav. But they begin with a tension. There is a tension, an inherent tension between matter and spirit. You see, even when Einstein, the Jewish Einstein, discovered E equals mc squared, that energy equals matter, and matter and energy are reversible, that doesn't mean there isn't a tension between the two. The tension is best expressed with just a simple experiment, a simple demonstration. Take a piece of wood, put it into a fire. What happens? So the wood will resist initially, especially if it's wet. It will resist the fire, but then ultimately they will join together. Because matter needs some force to break it down. It doesn't break down easily. So even though a liquid, a gas, and ice, take the example water. Water in its liquid form is liquid. And heat it up, it's gas. Freeze it, it's ice. So this is the classic, 101 chemistry. Water in gas, liquid, and solid form. Same thing. You need some type of force to either heat the liquid or to freeze the liquid. What that means is, even though it's the same thing, it's just different states, but there's the same entity in different states. So matter and spirit initially have an inherent tension, and yet they could be joined together. In context of psychological context, our struggle for survival or our material needs, our body speaking to us, I want this, I want that, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I am attracted to this, I'm seduced by that. These voices, which drive you impulsively and sometimes compulsively, your impulses, those are called in Jewish thought, they're called your emotions. Your subjective emotions. If we had no mind and no reflective mind, basically whatever you see is going to draw you and attract you. Even with a mind, that's what happens. But what does a healthy mind do? A healthy mind stops you and says, you know what, this may not be good for you. You may be drawn to it, but it may be dangerous. It may have long-term consequences. So we have a battle going on. The battle between mind and heart is another way of putting the battle between Jacob and Esau. The mind, Jacob, says, reflect. The heart says, no, I want it now. Now we all know who usually wins out. The classic, simple example, you get a phone call from a telemarketer. They're very good at manipulating your emotions. They offer you some type of thing, and you say, let me think about it. No, the offer it expires in 10 minutes. Why? Because they want you to make a quick decision, impulsive decision. If you thought about it overnight, in most cases you're not going to buy that shmata, that they're offering you. But most mistakes we make are impulsive. Someone gets you to do it right now. The reflective mind, how many times someone says something to you and you react and later you say, I should have shut up. How many mistakes do we make because of impulsive behavior? If you're maybe in the passion of the moment, if you just thought about it and waited a few hours, even less, it usually subsides and you can make a more objective decision. But that's the power of impulse. Impulse doesn't want you to wait. So the impulse forces you to make a decision immediately and then later to have to pick up the pieces. So we have the battle going on in so many different forms. Jacob and Esau, the internal psychological battle between what I called before matter and spirit. Your material needs, the body tells you, I want this and this. The mind tells you, this may not be good, there's a higher cause. Another way the battle takes on shape, you see someone is in need, you take care of yourself or you take care of somebody else. Are you here to take or are you here to give? So the warrior is a taker. The warrior is a battler. The warrior is a conqueror. It's an acquirer. And the scholar, the Jacob, is a giver. Serves. Sees that life is about serving, not about taking. At the same time, you also need to have an element, as I said before, of protection in a material world. But never think that Esau is your true identity. Esau is a necessary component when you're dealing with hostility and you're dealing with conquering elements. But it's not the essence of who you are. And that's why Jacob ultimately earns the birthright and earns the blessings. Why? Because he knows the direction, how to use these blessings. He wasn't taking them away from Esau. He was teaching Esau how to use them and ultimately return them back to Esau. And together, body and soul would join together in one glorious dance. There's an interesting disagreement between the Rambam, Maimonides, and Nachmanides, Ramban. The argument is, what will be the ultimate reward for our life in this world? So the Rambam says, Maimonides says, logically, that the ultimate reward will be reward for the soul. Because the body is an inferior entity. The body is a mortal creature that will ultimately die and is subject to all the deterioration and erosion of immortal and temporary things. So can't really get to gain the ultimate reward would be spiritual, infinite, immortal life in the world to come. But because the body was part of doing mitzvahs and good deeds in this world, it will also get reward that there will be a period of what's called Chiyas HaMesim, resurrection, but it's only a temporary state. The Ramban says, and this is the final conclusion by the Arizal and all the authorities, no, the ultimate reward will be body and soul together. Because even though it's true that spirituality has a superiority over material life, but since the body and the soul join together, there's something the body can teach the soul that the soul cannot teach the body. So, and bottom line is that it will be a Jacob and Esau union. So now with this chapter we start talking about this union and how it manifests. So how does the story go? As I said, Jacob is not sure where Esau stands, so he sends where the battle stands. And he realizes that Esau is not yet prepared to make peace. So he prepares the three manners I mentioned. He prays. He finds a way to appease Esau by giving him gifts and so on, buying him off. And he prepares for war if necessary. The war will not have to materialize. The appeasement works. What does the appeasement do? The appeasement is basically not, on a technical level, is basically bribing him. He feels kinder to him because he got some gifts. But let's be honest, Esau was not a fool. Esau had a lot of anger. Just a few gifts only going to cover up, so are going to forgive and forget all that was done to him. So clearly the appeasement was a little deeper than just that. The appeasement was a true gesture of Jacob showing we can work together. Now, so then the story continues where we're up to now. And Jacob takes his family over the river, across the river, and then remains alone. Why does he remain alone? That's the question. So, on a basic level, loneliness is the loneliness of living in he's re-entered into Esau's zone. He's no longer on the mountain studying, praying. He's now re-entering the war zone, where he's going to have to deal with the body and with the material world. And it's a very lonely place for a soul to be there. So that's the ostensible reason why it's called being alone. It's a sense of realizing that to fight the spiritual war in this material world is a very lonely and difficult thing. Because most people are not going to cooperate. To stand up for what is right is a very lonely place. Most people are conformists. Many people will sell out. So to really stand up when things are, when it's not popular, how many people really do that? And we all like to think we're noble, but push comes to shove. The fact is most people sell out, and if the price is right, they will be silenced, or they will even participate and be complicit in so-called the crimes. I just a few months ago I had a guy who was in a firm, very successful, and then he got himself fired. He told me, you can't imagine how many people, my own friends, that I saw getting fired, and I didn't say anything about it, because we live in dog eats dog world, and it was very clear in the competitive environment. It was in the world of finance. Everybody's pitted against each other, and you sell out. He says you sell out your soul with all kinds of justifications. You make more money, and then you'll help people. You find everyone finds their rationalization. But the bottom line, material world, you said, demands of you to not have loyalties. The loyalties we have, those innocent, are considered to be naive, and will get in the way of your progress. This is what you're told by your superiors, either directly or indirectly. And it's not even necessarily criminal. That's the worst part of it, he told me. The criminal things that are illegal are illegal. The worst part is the things that are legal are so immoral. Anyway, I guess I said to him, so you had to wait to be fired to discover this reality, right? Do you think you could see it when you're riding high, or only when you're at the bottom of the pile? No, good question. I'm not here to judge anyone. Everybody has to look at themselves and try to figure out how honest and integrity. But it's not easy to fight the Jacob war in the Esau world. Let's put it that way. And I'm sure you all have examples of it. I'm sure you've had your own experiences of it. So Jacob is very much alone, and he knows it, and the Torah emphasizes it. But what is the main reason he goes back? Rashi says, why did he remain alone? Why didn't he stay with his family? So the Rashi says an interesting thing, because he forgot some small vessels, and he returned to retrieve them. They were traveling, I said, the whole family. You can imagine a whole bunch of people. How many people were traveling? It must have been at least 40 people, 30, 40 people, maybe more. With a lot of, they had livestock, as I said, they had sheep, and they had all kinds of different possessions. But he left a few things on the other side of the river. So he went back. He crossed the river, brought his whole family. He went back to get what is called pachim ktanim. Literally means small little vessels or small little containers. A pach is like a small crucible. Chanukah is related to this. Some say this is the Chanukah pach. Pach Hashemen means that when the Greco-Syrians defiled the temple, Chanukah, so they found only one pach Hashemen, one small crucible of pure olive oil. So some commentaries say that's what this was referring to. But that is an aside. He went back for these pachim ktanim. The Talmud says why? Because at tzaddik, every detail matters. Here's life and death we're talking about here. Pekuach nefesh. Why is he going and remaining alone in a dangerous area where he knows that it's Esav's territory, anything could happen? And something does happen. But it was that important for him to get those details. So there we have the details. Is what causes him to be alone in those details. And exactly that happens. He's vulnerable, and this mysterious man goes to war, wrestles with him, till the morning, till Eles HaShachar. So what's the significance of this? So let's talk about details now. We'll talk about details. The details of our lives is definitely in the domain of Esav, because it's the tedious stuff that we have to do to survive. That's what details are. If you talk about Jacob is the big vision of things. However, the big vision does not function in this world without going through details. It's very good to have a big picture, be a visionary, but you have to also be able to implement. You want to change this world, you can't just escape on a mountain with a vision. You have to enter into the fray. And this is what the Talmud says, that a tzaddik looks at every detail. The Baal Shem Tov explains it as follows. He says that the way the Kabbalists put it is that each of us is allocated with a certain amount of sparks as we enter this world. Our job is to elevate those sparks that were allocated to us. So I'll use just a story to capture the idea. You'll immediately get it. I told the story many times. It's a powerful story. Mordechai HaTzadik was a great hidden tzaddik in the time of the Baal Shem Tov, and he told by the Baal Shem Tov to go on a trip to fulfill a particular mission. So as his ambassador, he travels, he comes back, fulfills the mission. The Baal Shem Tov wants to know, not just that he fulfilled the mission, how did you travel to this place? Seemingly trivial details. Why would he want to know that? Okay. He wants to know, so he said, I've traveled through this city, through that city, I went through this road, that road. No, I want to know exactly the details. Where did you sleep? So he said, one night I slept in an inn. Another night there was no inn, so I just slept at the side of the road, alone. And I woke up in the morning, and what did you do in the morning? In the morning I washed my hands, I said my prayers, I then sat down and had something to eat. And I washed my hands again, and I made a blessing on a cup of water. Where'd you get the water from? It says near the edge of the road was a brook, was a spring of water, and I took some water, and the Baal Shem Tov suddenly came alive, jumped up with excitement, and said, from the beginning of time, from Sheshis Yimei Bereishis, from the beginning of time, this spring of water was waiting for you to come to make a blessing on this water. And this, but the Baal Shem Tov was more excited than the whole mission that he had accomplished for him. This is an example of what the power of details are. It's called the concept of Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence. To use expression from the book of Psalms, a beautiful verse, Ma'ashem etzadei gover kenanu. God leads the footsteps of a human being. The fact that all of you sitting here this evening, anyone listening, or the fact of any human being, whatever they're doing, you may think you're coming for one reason, you're led by a higher hand. There's a higher story, there's a script, a choreography going on in your life. Why were some people born in this city, in this country? Why some people born in another city and country? Why do some of our trajectories take us through these and these places, meeting these and these people, experiencing these and these things? Why do some people, God forbid, lose family members at a young age and others don't? Thousands of details of our lives that you'll never have an answer for. All you can say is, that's what happened, and I have to do the best with it. This is the Jewish concept, hashgacha pratis, details. That even the way the Baal Shem Tov, even a leaf turning over in the wind is part of a larger plan. Someone will say, what's going on here? How could that be? The insignificant thing, a leaf in the wind? I mean, how many big things are happening in the world? Who really cares about a leaf turning over in the wind? How many leaves are turning over at this moment? Well, something today, thank God, the computer technology, the question doesn't exist. Let me ask you something. You ever see a computer program? It can have millions and millions of lines of code, and one dot is missing, or you add a one dot and the whole code doesn't work. As a matter of fact, it could cause the whole thing to go mayhem. Take the human body. How many cells do we have in the human body? Do you know? It's more than the United States deficit. 75 trillion cells. Trillion. Not billion, trillion. So $75 billion would be pretty good. 75 billion wouldn't be bad either. Right? 75 trillion cells. One mutant cell can destroy a person's life, God forbid. So we know today it's not about size. Today it's about quality. It doesn't matter size. One dot. So one leaf in the tree, we can't fathom it in the context of existence because we can't fathom so many details. But to say that a detail is not significant, no one's going to say that today. Maybe 150 years ago you could have said that. Even then not, but today for sure you see it all over. One little thing, one invisible force, one microscopic element, microscopic subatomic particle can create, what it can create? The most powerful nuclear explosion through fusion or fission. Now, so therefore the details matter, and the Baal Shem Tov was teaching a lesson that wherever you go, it's a sacred moment, not just Yom Kippur in the synagogue. You're walking down the street on a Wednesday evening, wherever you may be, it's a sacred moment. What are you going to do with this detail? Are you going to ignore it? Are you going to use it for selfish purposes, the Esav, for your warrior-like tendencies? Or are you going to be the Jacob and elevate it to a higher place? Now Jacob can make an argument. Listen, I'm sitting and studying Torah, I'm praying, I'm relating to God, leave me alone with the details. No, the Talmud says no, that's not what a tzaddik does. He realizes his soul was sent to this earth. Every detail of your life you have to immerse, even though it may put you in danger, even though it's very lonely. It's much easier to just sit and talk to God. It's much easier to just escape to a spiritual oasis and have a transcendent experience. To immerse myself in details, in diapering my children, in involving myself in seemingly mundane, menial stuff, I'm a big visionary. I'm a great person. Why are you sending me to details? That's the story. Jacob goes through the details. And yes, it will cause a battle. Who's going to win over the details? Him or the stranger? Which we'll talk about in a moment. One of the things that always fascinates me, it's to no end, I think about contrast. You think about contrast of great people in history. So people ask, who's the greatest philosopher in all of history? Most people will say Aristotle. And it may be true. Who's the greatest writer? Shakespeare, in English. You have a bunch of people. You have great emperors, great poets, great musicians, great artists. You have Rembrandt. You have Michelangelo. The classics. I'm not getting now in a popularity contest. I'm sure it could be argued. But, we have our top 10 in each of these categories. Modern world, we like the top 10. Top 10, top 15, top whatever it is. If you ask a Jew, from a Torah point of view, who are the greatest? So you'll have names like Abraham, Moses, and then later generations, different opinions, Rabbi Akiva, etc. So you study the difference of these people's lives. Abraham was, no question, the first pioneer of them all, the earliest one, pioneered the whole approach that changed the world in every possible way. He advocated, like his grandson would manifest, Jacob's grandfather, Abraham, advocated chesed b'tzedakah. What does he say? God says about Abraham the greatest compliment, because this is a man that dedicated his life and his children's and family's life to the path of doing tzedakah or mishpat. Justice, kindness, and justice. No man embraced that before Abraham. Even today, most people don't like to embrace it. But today, it's become institutionalized idea of kindness, justice, rights, human rights. The last few hundred years has become part of most of the Western world. Most of the world today is a world that Abraham initiated. Instead of taking care of me. What was each empire? The Roman. These were all warriors. They were all Esav-like. Jacob-like tendencies are just recently become part of our institutions and our governments. Interesting. Esav's approach was always the dominant one. War was always the first approach. Take an example. A few years ago, Haiti had an earthquake. Right? Now there's a terrible typhoon in the Philippines. What happened when natural disasters struck Greece, ancient Greece and Rome and other countries? What happened? Everyone knows, a student of history. Every neighbor couldn't wait to rape and pillage and exploit all the resources of those countries. What happened when it happened in Haiti? Suddenly all the countries are competing who's going to offer the most humanitarian aid. Now Haiti is a poor country, nobody even needs it. It could have been just split up by all its neighbors. Now I'm not saying, of course, conspiracy theorists will come up with all kinds of ulterior motives. For example, Haiti may be the next future market for McDonald's and Apple computers, stuff like that. But at the end of the day, Rome also was looking for new markets, and they pillaged and raped and destroyed countries around them, as did all other countries when natural disasters struck. So there's a change in the climate. I'm not saying individually we've won the war, people still are selfish and go to war and so on, but there's a change, there's a standard, with all kinds of explanations, maybe because CNN is watching, fine. But the bottom line is, there's a higher standard, a more Jacob-like approach than an Esav-like approach. So, bottom line is that there is a change in the world, and however, there is a battle. It is a battle. As I said, it's much easier to be a visionary. Now, here I go back to what I said about Abraham. What amazes me, what I was going to say before, what amazes me is this: you look at people like Aristotle, Socrates, and his student Plato, and then you go through Shakespeare. You go through all the Enlightenment thinkers, Voltaire, Rousseau, all of them, one after the other. Where are their grandchildren here today? Where are their grandchildren? They were all advocates of all kinds of great theories and ideas that still affect the world. Where are Aristotle's children and grandchildren? How come he did not feel it, if he had such a commitment to a certain path, of philosophical path? Why didn't he build a family, and not only a family, a community, and a nation that followed it? Now, I'm not saying that Aristotle has shaped some ideas about government and it still affects our philosophical thinking. But you don't see it in any family structure. And Abraham did. What is the difference? I'll tell you the difference is, in one word in Hebrew it's called bittul. When you're a big philosopher and you're a great mind, a great artist, as great as you are, there's also a certain deep selfishness in being an artist. Because you say, listen, I'm God's gift to the world. If you don't believe in God, you just think you're just the gift to the world. I'm the big gift. I don't have time, as I mentioned, to diaper children and to deal with a nagging wife and to deal with the menial things. I'll hire people for that. The great Rousseau, who's one of the great humanitarian thinkers, they say he took his children and left them in the middle of the center of the town because he didn't have time to take care of his children. Abraham transcended his own brilliance with recognizing the path of God is the God's in the details, my friend. Are you going to leave children and a family and a community or not? And that's why the Jewish people are here today. And all the Aristotles in the world did not leave any nation, as much as they have influence on thought. And I'm not saying this to pull rank, even though I am saying it actually to pull rank, but that's not my point. I'm saying it's a lesson in life. You see it throughout history. Great people are great about themselves. They don't leave necessarily a legacy. And I mean a legacy of children and grandchildren. I don't just mean a general philosophical legacy. Because they're more consumed with themselves, frankly, than with the world around them. Yes, they may be giving us a great gift, but I'm giving you the gift. It's me. And their name is more important than perpetuating the message. And Abraham rose above that. He understood that you have to give the bittul that you need. If you're truly man of God or woman of God, you're God's channel, you're God's ambassador in this world. It has nothing to do with you. Moses was the humblest man that ever walked on earth, it says in the Torah. Now, why is that important? Moses was the greatest prophet. Moses is maybe one of the greatest men in history, maybe the greatest of all. Because the humility is even more than greatness. Humility means, as Moses knew about his qualities. But like it says, Moses said, These are not my own. I was God-given qualities. I was born with these qualities. Had someone else been given these virtues, these qualities, these resources, they would have done better than I. That requires a true act. That's a true divine attitude. It's not just that I'm a great guy and I have a lot to teach. There's something greater than me. There's a God. And this is the reason that we have eternal Am Yisrael Chai, a nation that continues on and on, because there were people that paid the price. For a visionary, by the way, to spend time with his little children, you can say is a compromise. He could be sitting and writing books and teaching students and educating and inspiring millions. Spending time with little children, they're little kids. You know, they bring a babysitter, a nanny, and so on. As we so well know how to do today. Abraham was wealthy, he could have hired a babysitter. But no, he understood there's little details when nobody's watching and there's no fireworks and there's no glamour, and you're not winning a Nobel Prize. You're spending time with your little children night after night, day after day. That is eternity. So it's a really extreme level, because when you're a big picture person, it's very hard to focus on details. And that's what the Torah is telling us. That's why he went back. Yes, he knew he'd be alone. He has to enter now a world of details, which is not the big picture, but that's where God is in the details. However, he has to deal with the devil, because details can also do the other opposite extreme. They could also destroy your life. They destroy your life, and the details become more important than the vision. You see, what was held Jacob together, and that's why he could not be the angel, or this mysterious man could not prevail over him, is because because Jacob is holding on to the big vision. If you start getting consumed with the minutiae of life and the details, and you start wrestling with others about it, then you become part of the problem. You know, like people will say, I began my life with a very idealistic approach, and then I got involved in the details, and we started battling over them, and now I became part of the problem. Jacob did not lose sight of the ultimate vision. He knew that he's coming into this material world to deal with details, to deal with the minutiae, not as an end in itself, in order to elevate it for a higher purpose. And that's what kept him going. But at the same time, it is a battle. So here's the battle. Who's going to win? You're working in Wall Street. You're working in the most fierce, competitive, selfish arena. Who's going to win, your soul or your body? And that's the hardest thing of all. It's much easier to stay in a synagogue or stay in a holy, sacred place and prevail. But to deal with details like that and still prevail, that's not easy. Just give an example. Jacob had a son called Joseph. Joseph would later become the first Jewish accountant. Okay? Because Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers. And that's another story we'll talk about when it comes to that chapter. Joseph ends up in Egypt. He ends up being the accountant of Potiphar. Then he ends up becoming the viceroy of Egypt, second in command, because he interprets Pharaoh's dreams, and he turns Egypt into a superpower. It's the first commodity. Grain was then the biggest, because there was a famine. There was a global famine. And who had the grain stacked up? It was Joseph's idea. So Egypt became the wealthiest country in history. To that point. First superpower. Now, it's an interesting thing that it says in the books. It says that Joseph, in some way, was greater than Jacob, his father, and his grandfather Isaac, and his great-grandfather Abraham. Why? Because those three were shepherds. They chose to be shepherds. Why did they choose to be shepherds? Because sheep are docile creatures. Sheep, they graze in the fields. You don't have to be immersed in the Wall Street of the times, and you can just allow the sheep to graze, and you can meditate in nature, pray, study. Shepherds is very conducive for a spiritual lifestyle. Joseph was also began as a shepherd, but then he was thrust against his will into Egypt, and now he had to deal with Egypt. Erves Haaretz. It was a corrupt country. It was all about money. It was all about serving themselves. As a matter of fact, the Talmud says they don't even look up to heaven to pray because it never rains in Egypt. They rely on the Nile that irrigates the fields, so they're looking down, not up. So it's a very self-indulgent, narcissistic country. Mitzrayim means constriction, narrow straits, dire straits. Joseph goes into this world. Now the question is, what's going to happen? If you remain a shepherd, you're detached, it's somewhat of an ascetic lifestyle, will Joseph retain his spirituality now that he's in the corrupt world? And we know that 22 years he spends there, and the first time he reunites with his father, how does his father know who Joseph was? Joseph reminds him, the thing I learned, we studied together 22 years ago. They studied the laws of Eglah Rufa. It was just certain laws in the Torah. So they studied these laws. Jacob knew, wow, my son went to a country that was completely corrupt, and he retained his integrity. That is a far greater achievement, because he went into the world of details. Even more than Jacob did. Now Jacob began the process, as we're learning now. But Jacob did it on a small level. And Joseph did it in a full scale. Just to show you the power of this, there's a book called, one of the Sfarim called Seder Hayom. And he explains a strange passage in the Talmud. The Talmud says, La'elam Yizr Adam, a person should be particularly careful with the prayer of Mincha, the middle prayer, the afternoon prayer, because Elijah the prophet was answered for his prayers, the Mincha prayer. So Mincha, even though it's the smallest and the shortest of all prayers, and you don't say Shema in it, the morning prayer you say Shema, the evening prayer you say Shema, still you should be more careful. So Seder Hayom asks why. It seems to be, compared to the other two prayers, the morning prayer seems to be the most dominant, or the evening prayer. His answer is based on this concept. Because in the morning, it's before you go to work. In the evening, it's after you finish work. In the afternoon, while you're in the middle of the workday, and still remember there's a God, that's an achievement. Because you have to tear yourself away from the immersion in the material world. An immersion that is required. It says in the Torah, you have to masra matan ba'amuna. You have to do your business ethically and faithfully. So you can't be thinking about other things during work. And still you can tear yourself away and focus on something that's spiritual. That's an achievement, because you're in the fray and you keep your head above it. Like the story with the Rabbi Rashab I mentioned, he said that one of his students became a great successful businessman. He made a lot of money in galoshes. In the olden days in Russia, galoshes saved many shoes because there was unpaved streets. So the Rebbe met him years later, and he said to his student, he looked at him and gave one look and saw where his head was. He said, I've seen a feet in galoshes, but I've never seen a head in galoshes. Because his whole head, his whole life, his whole soul was immersed in his galoshes, in the business of it, that is, metaphorically speaking. So the key is to keep your feet firmly planted on the ground in the details, in the world of Esav, but to keep your head in the sky. Know that the purpose is not to be successful or to control or power in this material world. It's to turn it into a divine home. To take the details of life and elevate them, understanding that all the choreography of the details of your life are all divine providence, and turn them into something that is spiritual energy. It's like, a good businessman, what does he do? Everything is a resource. Everything is a lead, an opportunity. A Jacob in us sees everything also as an opportunity to turn it, to elevate the spark that has come your way. So your work, your business, your leisure, your family, anywhere you travel, all the places you've been to and will be to, all the people you'll meet, are all spiritual opportunities. You may be going there for your particular personal reason. The truth is, those details are there for you to elevate them. And Jacob teaches us this, and sets the path, paves the way that Joseph later would obviously consummate in a far deeper level goes back for these pachim ktanim. And yes, knowing fully well that he will be alone. It's a very lonely journey down there in the details. But that's where you have to go. And as the pasuk exactly says, and that leads right into the battle. So his remaining alone for those details is exactly the reason there's a battle, because now Esav's angel comes and says, this is not your domain here. This is my domain. I'm the warrior here. This is my property. You go back to your spiritual world. Don't come here on my terms. And that's where they begin the battle. And it says the battle was Ad Alesa Shachar. Now the reason it's Ad Alesa Shachar means, well, first let's talk about the mysterious man. Why is it just a mystery? Why does it just say Ish? Because frankly, this Ish is one that plays itself out in all our lives. The Torah does not want to define who this is. It's whatever force that challenges you and your spiritual integrity. That's the Ish. So the Torah is not coming to tell us a story about who it was. The Torah says right now, all of us have this mysterious force, a voice inside us that will battle you any moment in your lonely state, in your vulnerable state, as you try to make order and try to somewhat spiritualize and elevate this world. You will face a battle. The Torah does not mince words. It doesn't tell you maybe there'll be a battle. There will be a battle, because you have two voices inside of you. And your body, the selfish gene inside of you, is going to demand its time. And you will have a battle, but know that you can prevail. And that's why the battle continues. Ad aleis hashachar. You know the word aleis hashachar in Hebrew means, aleis hashachar means breaking of the dawn. But it's interesting, shachar, which we call morning, actually means dark. Aleis hashachar means the darkness rises. The dawn breaks because the darkness rises. That's what the Zohar says. So these words alone, till the dawn. Why was the war only till the dawn? Because the war is being fought when there's darkness. Where do most of our battles exist? When we are in ignorance. You know, the greatest battles is psychological battles when you don't know that you have strength. What is the best enemy? The best enemy does is they to convince you that you don't have the power. When you see clearly things for what they are, it's far harder to win a battle over you. I remember when I was a kid, so I played chess. I can't say I was a master, but I played decent chess. Then there was a guy in a summer camp who came to camp, and he claimed to be the best player, whatever. He thought he was some genius. He was actually excellent. So I don't know, I did this little mischievous side of me, so I decided to, I don't know if it was from the Jacob or Esav side of me, but bottom line is I decided to psych him out. And I just started planting the seed that I'm one of the best players in the world. You know, so I said, you know what? Let's play. Let's see. And he prepared himself, thinking he's meeting like one of these grand masters. And I'm sitting down. I mean, he was a kid, so I was able to manipulate him. We start playing, and I make a move, and he reads into every my move things that I didn't even mean. Now he lost pretty quickly because he was making such stupid reactions to something that I wasn't even, because he was convinced that I was so good. And this is a classic poker trick. You know, it has nothing to do with what kind of hand you have. It's what people think you have. And not playing the cards. Most real battles, good negotiations, are psychological battles. You always make beliefs. Let the other person think you have more. So when you're when you're not in the know, basically when it's dark, that's the best time to have a war with somebody, because they can't see. Now obviously both can't see, but it makes it easier. So that's why the battles of our lives is when there's no clarity. When we have no clarity, we're not clear. You know, even knowing this fact, that your life is a battle, and you were sent to this world, your soul, with a mission. Let's assume for a moment we believe this statement. It may be hard to accept if you've never heard it before. If you know that, if you knew that's 100% the case, that God sent you to this world and you're given all the power. You're not sent to become a businessman. You're not sent to do all kinds of other thousands of things you think are important. You were sent here to change the world in some way. And you knew that clearly. Trust me, most of your battles will go away. The problem is we don't have such clarity. We don't have such certainty, I should say. We're not sure. What should I really be doing tomorrow? What's really my calling? What's my mission? So that's why this battle is till aleis hashachar. Once the morning broke, this strange, mysterious gentleman he had no chance. He thought he may have a chance during the night. Even then he didn't win. But he did leave a wound, which is not to be discussed for now, because wounds are left. But the point is, the battles are fought when we're not clear. So clarity is our greatest gift. Studying these ideas, understanding them, and integrating them. And the end of the day is, what is the blessing that he gives him? Interestingly, the blessing is, your name shall no longer be Jacob. Yaakov means the heel. You know, that's why he was called Yaakov. Because he was holding on to the heel of Esav. Can you imagine? Esav is the warrior, and the scholar is holding on to the heel of Esav. And now the angel of Esav transforms it and says, you know what your name will be now? Yisrael. You know why? Because Yisrael means you've battled, you've wrestled with God, it's an angel, with God and with people, and you have prevailed. So from then on, the name Yisrael, next time you hear the word Israel, the state of Israel, the country of Israel, the land of Israel, the people of Israel, the name itself signifies the power that we have, which is that we can prevail over any challenge. You know, if people were asked these two options, you can live a life where you have no challenges, no problems, no challenges at all. You know, that's one prayer you can make, or one blessing you can ask for. Or a second, that any challenge that comes your way, you'll have the power to overcome. Which would you choose? And ostensibly, especially more mature approach would be the first. Just take away all the problems. I have no problems. But what kind of life is there, life without challenges? And is it even realistic? The greatest blessing you can get, a gift, is someone telling you, whatever challenge comes your way, you can navigate through it. You can overcome it. Because then, you're invincible. The first one says, okay, we'll keep challenges away from you, but it doesn't mean you become very powerful. The second one says, you have the power to overcome anything. Because when your head is in the clouds, when your head is upward, you're looking up, even while you're dealing with details below, you have the power to overcome any challenge. And that's who gives him that name? Of all people, the one he wrestled with. So that's what it comes down to. Details can either be in the devil's domain. That's if details start controlling your life and you don't have your priorities in place and your vision in place. Or it could be God is in the details. It's in God's domain. If you see your details as part of Hashgacha Pratis, and every detail is part of the bigger plan. So the key is to know that the details are necessary, but that's not what defines your life. What defines your life is your mission. And now the mission saturates and affects and informs every aspect of the details of your life. That's the key. To understand, that's the battle. So yes, there are two opinions whether this mysterious man was an angel, a divine force, or was he a evil force. Because there's the two options, what you do with these details. That's up to us. I told the story here, the analogy of the guy who was teaching time management class. So he made a demonstration. He comes into the classroom with a big empty aquarium. And with 4 sacks. Sack number 1 is big boulders. He puts them in the aquarium. He says, okay, it's class. Is this aquarium full? Well, they say in some ways yes, some ways not. Depends the physicists in the class said theory of relativity. Depends what you're talking about. It's full in one way, but not full in another way. Okay, correct. Opens up bag number 2. The bag number 2 has small rocks. So obviously, and he pours them into the aquarium. So the small rocks fill up all the gaps where the big stones, the big boulders did not occupy. Is it full now? Well, he had a third bag. So some said, hey, let's see what's in the third bag. They open the third bag, and there's a bunch of fine gravel, fine sand, very fine. And he pours that in. Now the sand, of course, fills all the rest of the spaces that even the small stones could not fill up. Until the top. Now is it full? Well, now it's pretty full. What do you do now? But there was another bag. Is that a trick bag, or is there something in there? Okay. Well, it opens up bag number 4. It's pitchers of water. And now he pours water into the aquarium till it spills over. So now you have big rocks, small stones, fine gravel, and water is spilling over. Is it full? Yeah. Now obviously if you knew some physics, you could probably fit in a few subatomic particles, but I don't know how you can bring that in a sack. Anyway, this is full. Now, so he says to the class, so tell me, what do we learn from this? So the smart Alex in the class say, listen, this is a class in time management. The lesson is obvious. That as much as your day is full, you could always add a few more things. Time management, right? Now don't think you can't add a few more things into it. Like they say, you want to get something done, you give it to busy people. You give it to a busy person. He says, no, that's not the lesson. That you don't need a whole demonstration. That we'll understand. The lesson is this. If you don't put the boulders in first, you're never going to get them in. If you don't have your priorities in place first, and you put the water and the gravel and the small stones in, the details, you're not going to be able to get the stones in. The first thing before you begin anything, get your priorities straight. What are the most important things? What are the means and what is the end? Just do this exercise. Make a list of what you think are the means of your life and what are the ends. You'll find out that a lot of things that you thought initially were means suddenly became the end, and the ends were lost somewhere in the shuffle. Because that's what life does to us. So details are critical, but they need direction. Like I said, Esav's details, yes, that's the world we have to transform. But you can also get completely overwhelmed by them if you don't have direction. You need choreography. You need to know that there's something that's guiding you through these details. That these details are part of some bigger picture. So you don't begin with details. You begin with the picture, and then the picture comes into the details. You don't start from the details and go to the picture. But in life, sometimes you have to work either way. Kierkegaard wrote that we can only understand our life backwards. but we have to live our life frontwards. You look back, you say, I understand now some things that happened, how it led me to this and this thing. At the time I had no clue. Frontwards, you don't know. Tomorrow life comes, we don't know what's coming. So comes Baal Shem Tov, Torah teaches us, the details are part of a bigger plan for you. Find your mission. Once you find your mission, everything else falls into place. Unfortunately, most of us don't know our mission. We don't know the end. The means have become the end. Most people, you say, what is the goal of your life, the objective? Many will say the following three things, hands down. To make a lot of money, to be happy, to build a good family. Those are the three things many people say. Okay, so most of us, the money thing will say, okay, we all know money is just a means, but let's be honest, most people do because money becomes an end, because you think, with money I can do everything else. Which, yes, you can buy everything, but you can't do some things with money. You can't, for example, find truth with money, you can't find love, and you can't find God, you can't find your soul. So basically the single and most important things have nothing to do with money. And you also can't take money with you to the next world, just for the record, if you talk about permanence. But people live with it like they think it's going to be here forever. Now, what's wrong with saying family and happiness? The problem is it's platitudes. It's very general. To say, for example, that a company's mission statement is to make money, or to bring, or to make their employees happy, or to bring up a healthy company, that's not a mission. Every company should be making money and have happy employees, and so on. A company has to have a particular mission that drives the company. That's a result. Happiness is a result of having a focus. Happiness itself is not the focus. As I think, who was it? William James? Or maybe the other James? Who said that, no, it was someone else, another thinker that said that those that search for happiness never find it. It's those that do things that automatically lead to happiness is one of those things that's a result of, never an end in itself. It's a result. You focus on being happy every day. Try to tell me how happy you're going to get, because you'll constantly be upset. Okay, so what's going to make me happy? Do something that you feel satisfying, that fulfills a calling, that fulfills a mission. Automatically, you will be satisfied. You will be content. The problem is we replace contentment with objectification. We live in a world of acquisitions. We think we'll acquire this, we'll acquire that. That's Esau's way of thinking. A hunter, he's a warrior. Let me conquer. I'm not happy today. Let me do another conquest, another war, another hunt. Jacob's approach is a bigger picture. However, I have to now enter the world of details, and sometimes I may have to fight as well, like he did. But that's not my objective. My objective is the bigger picture. My objective is to elevate these sparks, to take them and bring them back to where they belong. To take the material world that we encounter and we have to struggle with, and free the spirit within matter. Because in Jewish thought, ultimately, how you relieve the tension between matter and spirit is by spiritualizing the material. You take an object and you do a mitzvah with it. You take your hand and you give someone charity. You take an apple, you make a blessing, and you use the energy to do something kind for another person. Everything becomes part of elevating existence to another plane. So that, my friends, is the story in a nutshell. One verse. It captures the story of our entire lives. And you read it now on your own, and you'll see it's right in there. I'm not forcing it. It's just it's a story of Jacob and Esau, and how it plays itself out in these, no pun intended, details. And the result of Israel is being born from this. This is how Israel is born. Okay, Israel is born from a tension, a conflict between matter and spirit prevails. That's the meaning of the word Israel. So don't be disturbed when you see that their battles continue to rage in the Middle East. Some physical battles, spiritual battles, because that's the battle over Jerusalem, the battles that go back. Obviously, we all hope for the day that there will be no more battles. As I said, at the end of the story, what happens is Jacob and Esau finally meet, and they embrace, and they kiss, and they hug, and even according to the opinion that it's not completely pure, but they still hugged and kissed, they didn't fight. And then Esau says to Jacob, so now that we've reconciled, why don't we live side by side? And Jacob says to him, because the sheep are tender and the children are young. You go ahead, and I will follow slowly. So Rashi asked the big question, why is he lying to him? He knows he's not coming to live side by side. Rashi says, no, he knows he is coming. It just would take thousands of years. I mean, Jacob may not have known how long it would take. Jacob was saying, I will ultimately come. We will live side by side. That's the prophet in Avadia. There'll be the day where God's reign will dominate over Esav and Jacob, and they will live side by side in peace. Because ultimately, this battle will be won between matter and spirit, and there'll be a total convergence, fusion of the material and the spiritual, the Jacob and the Esav. And also in us personally, a total fusion between our own bodies and souls, between our minds and our hearts, and between the forces of survival and the forces of transcendence. So, I definitely encourage you to read the chapter yourselves. You can find many, many more lessons. And hopefully some of these ideas you can personalize, because each of us have our own particular struggles. This manifestation, the Jacob and Esav manifests in our lives, each in our own different way. But the bottom line is that we have the strength. And history is a testimony that we have prevailed. We're here today to talk about it. A story that happened thousands of years ago. One lonely night, a wrestling angel with Jacob for those details. And he prevailed, giving us the power, because we are of his descendants, to continue carrying the baton in this long marathon. And that we will ultimately prevail. And we see a world today where you see matter and spirit, at least on the technology front, are converging. You know, the mere fact that we can sit and communicate and watch and listen and see anything, anywhere, anytime, is a tremendous convergence of time and space and of matter and spirit. Because once upon a time, time and space separated us. It took time to get from here to here. Essentially, technology is eliminating the divisions that the material world have created. And it's not an accident. From the Zohar's perspective and from other mystical books, this is a pure reflection of matter and spirit, Jacob and Esav getting closer to each other, to the point where there'll be total convergence of body and soul. So, I hope we all can do our little part in this by taking your own life and checking out what your means are, what's your ends. And it's a refreshing exercise to sit down and just step back and say, you know what, maybe it's time for a little din v'cheshbon, a little accounting. Audit yourself. Audit your life. And say, okay, let's figure out, what do I do most of the time? How much of it is the end? How much of it is the means? At some point you have to do this, or else life, it will happen, is exactly that. Is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. You keep on going through the minutiae, what's going to happen is that at some point you're going to go back and say, what happened? And now is the time. We don't have to wait. Sit down. It may be a little disconcerting, maybe a little uncomfortable, because you have to look at yourself in a little very honest way, under the naked light of reality. But it'll be a very powerful way of getting out of your own stuck place, because you look at what you're involved in. I think it'll become pretty obvious why you may not be able to make a move. Because if you're stuck in that place, you're unable to you keep going around in circles in the details and can't say, you know, where is this all leading to? Obviously, there's an issue. And yes, it's about putting our priorities in place. What is a priority? You know, what should you get done this year? And not pushing off those priorities, because later, as I said, once your aquarium is filled with the water, the gravel and the little stones, to get the big rocks in is not so simple. Because then you have to empty the whole thing and change your whole routine. It's good to do it when you're launching. You know, you start from the ground floor up. But we have to do it whenever the opportunity rises. And now is as good as any time. So may God bless us all with the strength to do it, and deal a little with your Jacob and Esav battles, the details, the wrestling. And may we all merit to be proud of the name we carry, which is Israel, Yisrael, the power to prevail over any challenge. Everyone should have a very good week, and I will see you next Wednesday night. Philip's class will be taking place tomorrow night. In 2 weeks, I will not be giving a live class. I'll only do it online, just for the record. 2 weeks from now will be the night of Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is Thursday night, so Wednesday night. Just giving you a heads up. But next week we will have the class here, and it's always an honor and pleasure to talk to the little angel and devil inside each of us here. I had to add that, the Jacob and Esav battle. And if any way we could help you, have any questions, anything I've discussed tonight that you'd like to get more information on, always available. Please contact us. and it's great to spend time with you. Everyone have a good evening and a good week. Thank you.